And my sponsor said that I have what was called man reliance, which I think is just a nice term for something else. And so she said, Stephanie, I think it would be a great idea if you didn't ask men for anything anymore. And I said, okay, what if I need a cigarette? And I swear to God, like, these were the thoughts that went through my mind. Just shows you how sick I was. And, like, how am I going to get to work? The marvelous idea of, like, taking the bus was, suggested to me. And, like, buying my own cigarettes or asking women for cigarettes, but women scared me and I didn't feel like I could manipulate them. But I did what she suggested. What that did was it allowed me to become, like, an independent woman of God.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Boom shakalaka laka, or is it boom shakalaka laka? Nonetheless, greetings from Studio AA, deep in the heart of Texas. Welcome to this episode number 314 of Sober Speak, and that there was the voice of Stephanie C. that you heard at the beginning of this episode, and you are really going to enjoy this one. You're going to hear so much more from her in un momento, but first things first. This here episode is brought to you by Donald and David and Anonymous and Audrey and Laura. What, you may ask, did the aforementioned do to deserve such a mention? That's too many mentions. Aforementioned and mentioned is way too many mentions in one sentence. But nonetheless, what did they do to deserve such recognition on the beginning of this here episode? Well, they went, ladies and gentlemen, to our humble little website that the lovely Mrs. M upkeeps, and they clicked on the little yellow donate tab and they made a contribution. So thank you so much, Donald and David and Anonymous and Audrey and Laura. This here episode is coming right out to Ewans. It just occurred to me, I don't know if I've ever talked about why I say yeller, but it was like when I was a youngster in school, we read Old Yeller, and I don't know, that just comes to mind, and I don't know if you can hear it right now, but our little munchkin dog, her name is Maisie, is barking at something in the background, and I don't know what she's trying to do out there, but you may hear her barking every once in a while. So let's go to something that Mr. Jason posted in the super secret Facebook group. Thank you so much, Jason, for putting this in here. He wrote, it's actually a quote from the 12 and 12 on page 88. He says, "For the wise have always known that no one can make much of his life until self-searching becomes a regular habit, until he is able to admit and accept what he finds and until he patiently and persistently tries to correct what is wrong. And then Jason had a lot of good commentary after that. I'm not going to read all of it, but that's what we have. Several of these folks that are in the super secret Facebook group. They put something, usually a quote from the Big Book or the 12 and 12 or whatever the case may be, and then they put some commentary after it, and people just eat it up. If you are not part of that super duper secret Facebook group, go ahead and go to your Facebook application, search up Sober Speak Secret Group, not Sober Speak, because there's a page for Sober Speak. It's like a business page or whatever the case may be. I don't even know what they call it. I think they call it a business page of Facebook, but search up Sober Speak Secret Group, ask for admission into the group, and we will get you on in there. So let me read that again, because I really needed to hear that this week. And once again, this is from the 12 and 12, page 88. It says, "For the wise have always known that no one can make much of his life until self-searching becomes a regular habit, until he is able to admit and accept what he finds, and until he patiently and persistently tries to correct what is wrong." Boy, did I need to hear that this week. I'm going through I think I've talked about this before, some job, some career choices issues, but who's not, right? Well, maybe not everybody is, but I know that, I don't know, half of you or whatever, and this is just a guess on my part, are possibly going through the same sort of issues. But that's why I share it, just so everybody knows, hey, I'm just another bozo on the bus. We're all going through this together, right? For sure. All right, everybody. Now on to Miss Stephanie C., our featured guest of the week. This was recorded live at a Tri-Cities event here in North Texas. Stephanie attends the Hang Together or Die Separately group in Dallas and has been sober since May 13th of 2016. Let me read the name of that group again, because I love it. It's the group is called Hang Together or Die Separately. I love the name of that. And in this episode, or I guess in her talk, I should say, Stephanie talks about going from Reliance, M-A-N Reliance, to becoming an independent woman of God. And that's what we're calling the episode. And I absolutely love that. She also discusses the Hey Mister method of procuring alcohol as a youngster. Hey Mister, the benefits of a blackout. She talks about that. Stephanie discusses the Cinderella syndrome and exactly what that is. I had never heard of that before. And she talks about the use of Bumble and Tinder those are dating apps, just in case you don't know that, to secure a place to sleep at night. How she worked that system. So Stephanie's dream was just to have a margarita on the patio on a nice day. And she thought, that's not too much to ask, right? But as you know, with folks like us, having a margarita on the patio on a nice day doesn't always turn out to be a happy ending. She talked about, this really got me. I thought this was hilarious. Her experience in picking out backsplash after getting sober. She had lived a shelter life and didn't know what backsplash was. And she's going, I guess this is about being sober. Anyway, she talks about her stay at the 24-hour club in Dallas and what a turning point that was. But she also discusses some much more serious subjects like dealing with the CPS, Child Protective Services, psych wards, suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, trauma, and victimhood becoming her identity. and how she wanted to get and how she learned how to get away from that. She talked about how AA also rallied around her when her husband died of an overdose when she was sober. And you are really going to enjoy this one. Make sure that you turn it up real loud. Why am I saying that turn up? You don't have to turn it up loud. That was just a really silly thing to say. And, I actually could go back and edit that out, but I'm not because it takes too much time. And anyway, you just enjoy Stephanie C. And guess what? We will have plenty of listener feedback at the end of this here episode. Enjoy Stephanie.
Hi, y'all. I'm Stephanie Crawford. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I've been sober since May 13th of 2016, and I'm super grateful for that. It is an honor and a privilege to be here, and I genuinely mean that. I would not be alive today had it not been for Alcoholics Anonymous and the Big Book and the 12 Steps. So I'm going to pretend like I'm not talking to 10,000 people that this is supposed to be going out to, and just you guys right here. So I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, to very young parents. My mom was a senior in high school when she had me. And, growing up, I had no idea that like my parents were still children trying to figure things out, right? Because they were my parents. And from an early age, I just felt completely uncomfortable in my own skin. And I don't think my parents could have done anything differently, and I still probably wouldn't have felt like I was loved enough. One of my favorite speakers says, I have to be treated special just so I can feel average. And I resonate with that a lot. So, that was ever since I was little. And I longed for something so much greater than me. And I always knew that there was something out there, and I longed for connection. And I heard recently somebody say that addicts and alcoholics are just seeking spirituality. And I don't know if that's true, but I can tell you that was true for me. And so I have been a seeker my entire life. I grew up in an atheist household, but something inside me knew that to look elsewhere. And so I did Pentecostal, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic, non-denominational. I mean, you name it, I did it. So I've done it all, trying to seek this connection with a higher power. And I've been told that I would have made a really good cult member. And so if there was a cult, I probably would have joined that too. So, by the way, AA is not a cult. So if you're new, nothing to worry about there. And I had my first drink when I was about 12 years old. And it was like everything that I was seeking in church, I felt immediately, I would go to these different church services, and I would feel this high and feel this great connection. But then whenever I would leave, I would have to go back home and go back with myself. And so that would disappear. And when I found alcohol, it was almost like I could have it at any time that I wanted, except for the fact that I was 12 years old, and it's very hard for a 12-year-old to find alcohol. But I did at that point, I remember saying, I never want to be sober again. And that started my drinking career. And by 14 years old, I would have qualified to be here. The Big Book talks about there's two things that make us an alcoholic, right? There's the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. And so when I was 14, a freshman in high school, or, the summer of 8th grade, and I would go out and, we would do, hey, misters. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but you go to a gas station, you wait and be like, hey, mister, will you buy us alcohol? And so that would get our alcohol for the night. And, every time I drank to excess. One of the first times I ended up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning, and I remember my mom thinking, well, there's no way she's going to drink again after this, and she was wrong. I drank again as soon as I got out. And I did not know that the reason why this was happening was because like my body reacts differently when I put alcohol in it, and it has done that since I was 14. And I had this obsession of the mind where, like I didn't intend to go out and get like blacked out, right? Like I didn't intend to go out and make a complete fool out of myself, embarrass myself, and wake up, have my boyfriend be mad at me, want to break up with me, embarrassed about what I did. I remember my friends would try to tell me, I'm like, don't tell me. Like, why would you do that to me? The gift of blackout is you don't have to remember. And so like, I did not like that feeling when I woke up in the morning, right? And so, but I did like the feeling that alcohol gave me. I did like that feeling that alcohol produced. And so, I would write in my journals, and I had a lot of trauma from my home and as a young child, and I use that as an excuse to drink a lot. And because of that trauma, I was in therapy, and so, by 15, I can't even drive yet, but I'm already like writing in my journal about how like I'm going to control how much I drink this weekend, and this is how, and I'm making these deals with my therapist about, if I can stay sober this weekend, then, we'll work out some sort of reward system, like all of this stuff that like typically like 15-year-olds don't really like have to do, or adults even, they just don't drink that much. But so like I have that obsession of the mind where, like every single weekend I thought that this time it was going to be different. And I really believed that this time was going to be different. And every single time it was the same. Right. And so that, went on. And when I was, 19 years old, I met a guy, and, part of my spiritual malady, which is how I feel stone cold sober without a program, is that I think that like, I call it Cinderella syndrome, where I was just like waiting for the right guy to come, like take care of me, and all of my problems would be solved. And so 19 years old, meet this guy, he's 24, which means he's very mature, and, he's like a bartender and like a part-time mortgage broker, and he has a car and an apartment. And I flunked out of college and am living with my parents. So, he was definitely going to be the one. And so I meet him, and about 3 months later, I find out that I'm pregnant. And, just like any good alcoholic, we move right in together and play house. And this was going to be the thing that that saved me. And I remember being pregnant and just being like, oh my God, I can't wait to have a glass of wine. And like just really like fixated on when this baby was going to be born so I could drink again. And then the craziest thing happened is when she was born, like I did not care at all about having a drink again. The big book also talks about this like invisible line that we cross, right? And some of us could quit long ago if we had a sufficient reason. And, like while I had that obsession of the mind and this, the allergy of the body, I had not passed that line of no return. Right. And so suddenly it was just like the only thing that mattered to me was this little girl. And it was like, I knew why God created me, and it was to be a mother, and not only like any mother, but it was to be her mother. And I still like believe that to be true today. I mean, she would probably tell you something different today because we got in a little bit of fight and she hates me right now. But I really do believe that like God created the two of us to be together. And so like I stopped drinking, I stopped smoking, I stopped doing all of that stuff. And my whole focus went to take care of this little baby. And then, I remember because I have the spiritual malady, right? I get restless, irritable, and discontent. And, like I remember like I'm going to the gym and I lost the baby weight and I'm 22 years old. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, woo. And, all of a sudden, like that guy is like really, he's like not that hot anymore, and his laugh is really annoying. And like, I'm 22 years old and I could do so much better. And so, like he's not fixing that internal condition in me anymore. And so I break up with him. And then what that does is that frees up every other weekend and 2 days a week, because we did 50-50 from the start, to do whatever I wanted. And I did what normal people in their early 20s do who are single, is like I went to the bar. And my alcoholism picked up right where it left off. And I went down quick. I started coming into the rooms of recovery at 22, and I didn't get sober until I was 27. And so that is 5 years of trying to manage this thing and trying to stay sober. And I remember when I first started coming into the rooms, I would see my daughter would come with me, and she was like my little sidekick, and she was the cutest thing, and she was so good. And I remember like being completely judgmental of these parents that I saw who like didn't have their kids, or who had CPS involved, or who were living at halfway houses with their babies, and just being like completely judgmental and thinking that like I would never get that bad. And how can you not stop for your kids? I mean, look at me. I'm here as a mother because I love my daughter and I don't want to get that bad, right? And what I didn't understand at the time was this idea of like losing the power of choice, right? And I didn't understand at the time like that these women had no choice, right? Until I had to experience it firsthand. And so I'm going to fast forward to paint a picture of what it looked like towards the end, before the end. And I'm living in this townhouse, this 2-bedroom townhouse. It's me and my daughter. She's in kindergarten. And, I'm working for this company that's a respected company. Everything's great. And within a matter of months, I lose a job. I can't hold a job. I can't even get my daughter to school because she's coming down in the morning trying to wake me up, and I'm passed out in the chair with a bottle of wine in one hand and a bottle of pills in the other, and she can't even wake me up. Like I can't even get my 5-year-old daughter to school. And this little girl, who is just the sweetest thing, has to start trying to take care of her mom. And I remember one time, CPS came to my house because it was probably obvious at school that she was being neglected, because that's the truth, is she was being neglected. And CPS came to my house, and I didn't even have the electricity on. Like I was like sleeping. Like I was a squatter in my own home is basically what I was, meaning like I didn't have furniture because I sold it all. I didn't have any electricity on. I didn't have food in the fridge, but I did have beer and wine in the fridge. When I ran out of my own things to sell, I started selling my daughter's belongings, and I started stealing from her piggy bank. And, while that might be, very hard to hear and very hard to say, like that is the truth about my alcoholism. And that is where my alcoholism takes me, is to a point where I will steal from my own daughter. And CPS comes to my house, and, my daughter is visiting her dad in Texas. And for some reason, I don't know why, they bought my lie. I played up that struggling single mom card hard. And they bought it, and so the only thing I had to do was get the electricity turned back on. And I couldn't even do that. Like I couldn't even get the electric on to not get my daughter taken from me, because I could not spend money on anything else without having something to change the way that I feel first. And so, my daughter ended up moving to Texas. And her dad drove up from Little Elm. Hi, you guys are here. From Little Elm, Texas, to pick her up. And, I saw her drive away, and I was thinking that I was going to see her again in about a month. And I probably didn't see her again for another year or more. And so I end up in Texas because after about a year of couch surfing and everything else and being this an abusive relationship, there was one night where I came to in a bathroom, and there's a reason why I'm sharing this. I come to in a bathroom and I have blood all over me, and it was just like this abusive relationship had gone really bad really fast. And I remember thinking, like, I'm never going to see my daughter again. I'm never going to see my daughter again because this man is going to kill me. And I made a deal with God that night, and I said, God, if you let me live, I will leave him. And so that was the last time that I escaped. After a series of circumstances, I bought a one-way ticket on a megabus and came to Dallas, Texas. I had a bag packed, and that was about it. At this point, I was already like pretty homeless anyways, besides like living with this guy. And so I was able to get a bag and head down to Dallas, Texas. And, you know, I had no idea what I was going to do when I got down here. I didn't know anyone here. I tried calling battered women shelters, but couldn't get into any of those. You know, they like mentioned that you had to be sober and also pass a drug test, and I couldn't do either of those. And but like at that point, it was like I knew that like if I had any chance of seeing my daughter again, like I had to get to Texas, you know. And I was like, I'm already homeless in Missouri. If I'm going to be homeless, I'm going to be homeless near her. And the reason why I share that is because like if I think about all the things that I've done in my life, probably one of the most courageous things that I've ever done and the bravest things I've ever done was leave the only place that I ever knew to come to a state. Like, I really thought that there was going to be like horses and like saloons and cowboy hats. And it wasn't like that at all, obviously. But so like, I literally had no idea what it was going to be like when I got here. But I did all that just to be able to see my daughter again. But I fought so hard, to be with her and to get her back. And the one thing that I could not do, and it was the only thing that I had to do to see her, was to stay sober. And like, I could not do that. And so when I think of powerlessness and what that looks like, that is absolutely what that looks like for me. Is if there's one human power that should be able for me to stay sober for, it should be able to be my daughter. And I can't even do that. So I got down here in January of 2016. My sobriety date is May of 2016. So I definitely, got to experience what Texas has to offer as far as alcoholism goes. And I'm just going to share this one story because people think it's funny, so maybe you guys will too. But, people are like, oh my God, like, what'd you do? Did you have to like stay on the streets? Like, how'd you do that? And so like one of my hustles was I had this phone that I could connect to Wi-Fi, but didn't have data or anything because, well, I couldn't even afford to turn a phone on. But I would go to like Jack in the Box or McDonald's or something, and I would connect to this Wi-Fi, and I would get on the dating apps. This was before Hinge, so it was Bumble and Tinder. And I would swipe until I finally connected with the guy that was willing to meet me that night. And so that would be my place to stay and my alcohol and anything else that I needed. And then you'd be very surprised how many guys will just let you kind of come on in and never leave. And so I did that a lot. So just, if there's anybody in here, meeting somebody on Tinder, just make sure it's not homeless first, okay? And so that does get tiring, like trying to figure out every night where you're going to sleep and where you're going to stay and how to keep this person from being mad at you, from kicking you out. I was so entitled when I just think back to that. Like, you want me to pay rent, but like, you have me. Like that, I just thought that like he should just be totally grateful for my existence near him, so gross, but that's just who I was. And so that gets very tiring, right? And I end up at this place called the 24-Hour Club. And it was after just another night of doing the same thing where I have every intention of going to get sober, going to get help. I didn't know there was like such places like treatment centers or anything like that. So I did a lot of psych wards. And so it was like another trip to Green Oaks. And, I was like thinking that like, this is going to be it. But I pass the shops of Legacy and I see people drinking with impunity out, and they're having a margarita on the patio. And that was like my greatest obsession, is that I just wanted to have a margarita on the patio on a nice day. And nice days used to really make me angry because I was so mad that like I couldn't do that. And so like I thought that I was just going to have one margarita, and because I have that allergy, it sets it off. And I'm coming down from other stuff in some dude's apartment that I don't know, wondering how did I get here again, and it's like, I'm at that jumping off point where, to continue on drinking the way that I am, sounds absolutely horrible and scary, but trying to be sober sounds equally scary. Because in the 5 years that I was in and out, the only honest chip I ever picked up was 30 days. That doesn't mean that I didn't pick up other chips, because I did, but I was drinking when I was doing that. And so I could never even make it to 60 days. And when I was sober, I was miserable. And so like both of those options sounded scary, and I thought that the only thing for me to do was to end my life. And I really thought that my daughter would be better off without me, that like she could just grow up and I could be the hero that she remembered me as, instead of her having to grow up with a drunk for a mother, and luckily God intervened, and I ended up at the 24-Hour Club, and that's when my spiritual experience and everything started to happen, right? I remember seeing all these people, and they were, they were so happy. And if you know anything about the 24-Hour Club, the old building, it wasn't very nice. There was bed bugs. Like a possum fell through the ceiling of the meeting room one time, I think. Just like stuff like that. It was just, but like I felt safe, which I hadn't felt in a very long time. And there was people happy, and they were talking about the obsession being removed. And I didn't know anything about that, what that was like. And they were talking about like a spiritual awakening. And I remember like asking like, what's a spiritual awakening? How do I get one of those? And, and they would tell me like that it was a personality change, and, that I had to work the steps. And so I landed there on May 5th of 2016. My sobriety day is May 13th. So obviously I drank again. Okay. But what happened was my last spree was only one day. Thank God the people who lived there drug me back there and were just like, just pass out. Cause I was ready to go on another spree and like move to Corsicana with some guy that I just met, And so like, thank God that they did that. And I woke up the next day, and of course, the program manager comes in because, somebody, quote unquote, snitched on me. That's the way I thought of it at the time. And he comes in and he accuses me of drinking. And of course, I deny it. And we're going back and forth. And like suddenly, like I just am like, I start crying. And like, I can't lie anymore. And here's the thing is, I was planning on doing that again that day that I woke up. Like when May 13th, I had no intention of getting sober. I thought I had gotten away with it, and I planned on doing it again. And so, thank God that that person did what they did. Right. And so, I just finally like break down, and he says, Stephanie, if you can stay sober for 72 hours, we'll hold your bed. And I think that's whenever I really, like, for the first time, like, fully conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. Because it was that point in time that I really, really genuinely wanted to. But I also really didn't know if I could. and I'm crying and I'm just like, I just don't think this is for me. I just don't think I can do this. And, and he said, Stephanie, that breaks my heart because this is a beautiful life. And that is something that spoke to me because I could tell that he meant it. And he started telling me about these things that like God had done in his life. And he had only been sober for 11 months, right? And so there was two things that happened in that is that he told me that he lived a beautiful life. And I knew nothing about what a beautiful life was, right? I didn't care about being sober, but like I wanted a taste of that. And the other thing that he did for me is he showed me that I didn't have to wait an entire year to start feeling better. Because that was the other misconception that I had is if I just held on real tight and was able to stay sober for a year, then maybe I could get better. The problem is that I can't even make it to 60 days doing that, right? And so they introduced me to my sponsor in the parking lot. And she's this beautiful blonde, so kind, and she's smiling at me, and, she's like, I'll sponsor you, and I'm like, oh my God, but what about the steps? Like I can't stay sober long enough to work the steps. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And I'm so grateful that this woman saw me as an individual and like met me where I was and saw me in my brokenness, because what she did with me is not typical of sponsors. It's not even typical of what I do with sponsees. I've never done this before. But she took me through the first 3 steps within 2 seconds of meeting her right there in the parking lot right there. Because she knew that I needed to take some action. And she also needed to show me that like I could start taking action now, and I'm so grateful that she didn't say, hey, read these pages and then call me tomorrow. Which is fine. People do that, right? And I don't think that there has to be a certain way that we do the steps, although I think the big book is great. But like, I don't think that like, they're like God, we don't have a monopoly on God, right? And so I think God is so much bigger than the rigidity that I can put on him sometimes, right? And so step 1 was easy. Step 2, was really just like, can you believe that would work for me? What would work for you? And I thought, well, and I really was like, I don't know, I'm pretty bad. And she was like, out of thousands and thousands of alcoholics that this thing has worked for, you don't think it could possibly work for you? And I said, well, maybe. And she's like, that's fine. And so, then step 3 was just, told to me at the time that I was going to continue on with the rest of the steps, right? And while if you read the big book, there's a lot more that's talked about with step 2 and step 3, right? But it's all about like these internal requirements, right? Like being willing to believe, laying aside prejudice, being convinced that my life run on self-will could hardly be a success, being surrendered, right? Like I had all those internal requirements that the big book talks about, although at the time I didn't know that. And I remember she said, all right, well, I'm going to go pick up my kids and, oh, you're going to have to do the 3rd step prayer. Okay. Shannon, come here. Shannon, you're going to do the 3rd step prayer with Shannon. Okay. I had never met Shannon. And so, but I saw her, walk away, and I just remember thinking like what I would do to be able to pick up my daughter from school. Like this woman is getting into a car that she owns to pick up her kids from school. And so if that means that I have to do something that I have no idea what I'm doing or what it means or anything, like I'm going to do it. And so I did my 3rd step prayer on the side of the building of the 24-hour club with the woman I didn't know, saying words that I didn't know what they meant. And I started writing inventory that day. And, and what the inventory, I had so much just like justified anger and resentment. And I lived in this victimhood, right? And I remember being like, oh, this is so great. She's going to like understand why I drink. And she's going to have to like listen to me. And like my feelings are going to be validated. And, like that's not what happened at all in my 5th step. Which thank God. Because like my trauma and like my victimhood like became my identity, right? And like while I know today that like I had every reason to be angry, I had no luxury to be angry, right? And so like thank God she didn't do that, because while I was thinking that she was gonna be like, I don't know, validating my feelings, I guess. She like didn't even say anything at all, and just wrote down character defects instead. And Chad just like, what that did was like, it deflated the ego, right? And when the ego is deflated, like it makes room for God. And like, that's the only way that I can explain it. And God, who is like all love, pushed out all of that hatred and anger and everything that I had in my heart. And so I do the hour outside of the 24-hour club. And for the first time, I feel this forgiveness for my mother, because I had blamed her for everything, for my trauma, why I was the way that I was, everything. I planned on never talking to her again. For the first time, I can see Cadence's dad and stepmom as not the people who are like keeping my daughter from me, but like taking care of my daughter, right? And because my perception changed, like my relationship could change, right? And I started the process that the big book talks about of the long period of reconstruction ahead, right? And because of that, I was able to make amends to her dad and start that relationship. I was able to make amends to my mom, something I thought I would never do. And then the other thing that I got to do is I really got to look at the sex conduct piece of the inventory. And my sponsor said that I have what was called man reliance, which I think is just a nice term for something else. And so she said, Stephanie, I think it would be a great idea if you didn't ask men for anything anymore. And I said, okay, what if I need a cigarette? And I swear to God, like these were the thoughts that went through my mind. It just shows you how sick I was. And like, how am I going to get to work? And like, the marvelous idea of like taking the bus was, suggested to me, and like buying my own cigarettes or asking women for cigarettes, but women scared me and I didn't feel like I could manipulate them. And so like, but I did what she suggested. And like what that did was it allowed me to become like an independent woman of God, right? And through living in 10, 11, and 12 and, sponsoring, having a home group and being sponsored, which means utilizing a sponsor, I've been able to stay sober and create like a beautiful life for myself. My first sober job was a cashier at Torchy's Tacos. And I don't do that anymore. I like have a job where, like I'm valued as an employee and I'm like actually been sought out to workplaces and like I can negotiate salaries and like get promoted. Like those were ideas that like were just completely far-fetched for me, honestly. Like I didn't feel like I was smart. I didn't feel like I had any value. I didn't feel like I had anything to offer the world, right? And so the fact that like I've gone from Torchy's Tacos to that is like just a miracle and like could not happen without the program, right? I was homeless. I'm not homeless anymore. And, I want to like share some things that have happened in my sobriety and what Alcoholics has done for me since I've gotten sober. When I was about a year or two sober, I met a guy, in the rooms, and we, were getting a house built in the suburbs. And, I was like a homeless person. And now like I'm picking out backsplash. Like I didn't even know what backsplash was. Like I didn't grow up with a lot of money either. And so it was just like I felt like, I had it all, right? And so as this is happening, the thing that I thought would never happen was he ended up relapsing. And so, I go from like having it all, to having to completely start over. I was a stay-at-home mom, all of that. I had to figure out where I was going to live, where I was going to work, how I was going to take care of my kids. And I remember having my son and taking him to these meetings with me, and like the women, I was going to Chicago group at the time, but the women of Chicago group, they like took turns like taking care of my son as like an unofficial service position so I could have a meeting you know? And there's people who are in this room who completely dropped what they were doing to move me into this, from this big house that I was living in to this tiny townhome that my sister's friends called the ghetto. I didn't think it was ghetto because I've seen the ghetto, but they thought it was. You know, and so I'm like doing the things that I thought I would never be able to do, and like the people of Alcoholics Anonymous are helping me do it. And he ends up getting sober again, and about 6 months later, you know, like I'm thinking, well, maybe we can make this work. He's starting to see Wesley again, and 2 guys show up at my house, and they let me know that he had overdosed in the bedroom of his Oxford house. I didn't even know that he had relapsed again. And what happened that night was that I had a house full of women. The women that I were afraid to talk to, the women that like I felt like, you know, like I couldn't really get in with because, you know, like I didn't know how to have like true, authentic relationships. Like my house was filled with women who just like sat there with me while I cried and sat there with disbelief. And, you know, and like, I remember for like 2 weeks, I had like an inner circle of girls who just like rotated to make sure that like I wasn't alone. And there's somebody in this room who is also there for that. And they cleaned my house, and they picked up my kids from school, and they like brought me groceries, and there was a GoFundMe started that was just like, the amount of money that was raised was insane. Like I didn't even know like people really liked me. But like the fact that they were willing to help, not just like because they knew me or because they knew Isaac, but like because like the type of people that Alcoholics Anonymous creates are the type of people who like completely give of themselves to others, right? This has been a whole thing for me lately, but the big book talks about like self-sacrifice for others is what's going to help us when like nothing, like is what's going to help us grow our relationship with God and grow in our spirituality, right? And so like Alcoholics Anonymous creates people who are willing to self-sacrifice for others. And I'm so grateful that those people did that for me. And I remember, you know, like at his funeral and everything else, it was like filled with people from AA and another fellowship. And they were just saying, you know, like, I remember you guys coming to Turtle Creek to carry the message. I remember him from the Addison meeting. He was the first one that took me through the steps, and like all of this stuff, all of the hundreds and hundreds of people that he helped, like that's the legacy that he can leave for his son. Right? And the other thing that AA has taught me was that when things are going great is when I should be practicing this stuff the most, right? Because when Isaac died, I had already set up, I had a sponsee that was getting ready to go on an amends trip. And I had already had a meeting scheduled with her before he died, right? And so, you know, it's 3 days after he died, and I'm meeting with the sponsee. And like I knew to do those things because my feet had been trained for all of the times I was doing those things when things were going well, right? And I remember meeting with that sponsee and like just crying and like thanking God for that opportunity to like be there with her and him and not have to think about anything else. And I know my sponsees were like not wanting to bother me and all that stuff, but what they didn't know is like it's so cliche, but I can't, like, it is absolutely 100% so true. And I mean this, is that like, that's when we need them the most, you know? And like, that's when they helped me the most. And I just remember being so angry at God and not wanting to see a big book because, you know, how can other people come into AA and not have to do anything and they get to stay sober? And, you know, and I just like, I didn't want to carry the message, like nothing. And I remember the first time, like, I had to carry the message, like reluctantly. I cried again. I cried again because like, I could not imagine my life without it. Right. And so that was 3 years ago. My son is 4. And so since then, I have, met somebody else and engaged to be married. And, the thing that I thought, I was so scared when when Isaac died, for Wesley, about like who was going to do the things for him, like teach him how to throw a ball, and just recently, like I got to watch my son throwing a ball with my fiance, those like little things that like I didn't think were going to happen. And I've gotten to see them happen. Right. My daughter is 15 now. It took about a year and a half before she was allowed to stay the night at my house. So, I had a lot of work to do, and I did what the big book suggested, was I just stopped fighting it, right? And I trusted that, like, if God can do this wonderful thing, which was remove the obsession, like, why shouldn't I trust him with this area of my life, right? And so, like, I wish I could sit here and tell you that, like, oh my God, we have the best relationship. If it was yesterday, I probably would have told you that. But, like, the reality is like, she's 15, and like, sometimes she hates me. And today was one of those days. And, and I can get, in a place where I start to become ungrateful again, right? I start to forget how badly I just wanted another chance to be able to take her to school, right? And I start to get bothered with the responsibilities of life, aka the gifts of the program, and so it's like having things like this that are already in place that are able to get me to the point where I'm regrounded and I'm recentered, and I get to remember why I'm even able to show up for her in the first place, and why I'm able to do any of that in the first place. And that is ultimately, absolutely, 100% because of the spiritual awakening that I had that connected me to a power greater than myself, which I call God. And the fellowship is great. The service part is absolutely wonderful. But if I can leave on anything, there was something that my sponsor said to me. She said to me, like, way early on, was that your relationship with God is absolutely everything, because there's going to be a time where your sponsor can't get on the phone. There's no page in the big book that you can turn to. There's no meeting that you can get to. There's no service work that you can do. And the only thing that you're going to have left is your relationship with God, right? And while that sounds like daunting and scary, and like, how do I do that? Like, the big book illustrates it so well. And it's why 10, 11, and 12 are so important, right? Because that gets me to the place of when that one thing happens, right? Like, I'm already connected. And so I'm super grateful. I just celebrated 7 years, and, I thank you. And the fact that, somebody who couldn't even stay sober for 60 days and got pissed off on a nice day because it meant that I couldn't have a margarita, and I'm like sober, and like nice days like make me happy now, and I don't even think about how I don't get to have a margarita, like that is an absolute miracle. And so I'm just so happy to be here with you guys, and thank you. And that's all that I have.
Once again, thank you, Stephanie C. What an incredible and impactful message. I know that the listeners out there are going to get so much out of that talk. I appreciate you letting me record you and sharing this with the listeners that are out there. If you are out there and you thought to yourself, I have a friend or a family member that may need to, that needs to hear that message, go ahead and pause your device. click that little share button and send it on over to that friend or family member. It may be just what they need today. Now, well, before I go on to listener feedback, who out there has touched your life in a recovery sense, I guess I should say, or just in general, right? Who is out there who has touched your life? Who is your, they call them a Eskimo, right? Is there somebody that has helped you along? Somebody that helped you get sober? Maybe it's a sponsor. Maybe it's just somebody in the meeting who said a nice word at some point in time. Maybe it was somebody that you called on the phone at the inner group. Maybe it could be anything. If there's someone out there who's touched your heart and you want to give them a little love via the airwaves, go ahead and write me at John, JOHN, at soberspeak.com. And assuming that it is appropriate, we will get it read during listener feedback. And you could tell them to tune in and listen to me read about them. Now, on to a little bit of a listener feedback. I hope I am getting this name correctly. It is Fiatra writes in, Fiachra. I am probably bastardizing that, but I'm sorry. They say, "Hey, John M., a big thank you for accepting me as part of your Facebook group. Are you kidding me, Fiatra? It is my pleasure. The pleasure is all ours," however you say that, right? Anyway, I'm glad you're in there. She says, "I am from Limerick in the west of Ireland." So is this the place where those limericks come from? Is this where, and is the limerick the thing where you go, "There once was a man from Nantucket"? And then you start to kind of fill in the blanks. I think that's what a limerick is, but my English is not fantastic, right? And I didn't do fantastic in school. So that could be just kind of like one piece of information stuck in the back of my head. But I was pretty good with the "There once was a man from Nantucket," but I will spare you that talent of mine. Anyway, and by the way, is that a he or a she? I'm so sorry, I can't remember. I think it's a she, Fiatra, but I'm not completely sure. So anyway, she, we think, says, "I'm an alcoholic." So she's from the west of Ireland. "I'm an alcoholic." By the way, I understand, Fiatra, that my friend Bill C. tells me that Ireland is the birthplace of alcoholism. Now, I can't confirm that, but I would imagine the percentage hits over 10% there. But anyway, she says, "I'm an alcoholic with 2 years and 8 months of sober time. I've recently taken up a GSR position with my home group and came across your site after I Googled something to do with the traditions. I was delighted and hugely grateful to you for taking the time and considerable effort to publish so much useful, informative content. That sums up our fellowship, really. Thanks again, John M., and I look forward to being part of the group. Yours in fellowship, Fiatra." It could be a Fiatra. I bet it's Fiatra. Anyway, thank you, Fiatra, for writing in. I sure do appreciate you, and hopefully, gosh, I would love to get over there. My roots are in Scotland. My mom was from Glasgow, and I went back there a couple times as a kid, but I need to get back over to Ireland and Scotland, and while I can, it'd be really cool. But anyway, thanks for writing in. Susan writes in, and she said, "Oh, I remember this one. Yes, I forgot. So yes, this is very interesting. You want to listen to this one." Susan B wrote in, and she wrote, "AA is actually a cult, excuse me, C-U-L-T, cult. She says, run it through the BITE model, and it's capital letters, BITE. Now, a very good podcaster probably would have gone and looked that up and see what the BITE model is. I don't know what the BITE model is, but I'm sure some of you out there knows what that is. But anyway, she says AA is a cult. Run it through the BITE model. She says alcoholism is not a disease. There are methods that have proved to be effective when treating AUD. And I believe AUD, and I'm not a doctor here, I think that's alcohol use disorder. And then she says, the big book needs to be updated because we have made we have made the scientific advancements they say don't exist. We've learned most AUD/SUD cases are related to trauma. That could be sexual use. I bet it's substance use disorder is what that is. And my mind goes to the, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, and then she says, this AA is a religious cult and everyone knows it. She says, I'm sure you do on some level, John, but like me for the last, she didn't put John in there, but anyway, she says, like me for the past 15 years, you're too afraid to acknowledge it. So, and that was it. So she did leave an email. A lot of times when I get stuff like that, people don't leave emails or numbers or anything like that. And so, I just decided I wanted to write back to her, right? And so here's me writing back. I says, hi, Susan. Thanks for your email. I realize different people have different viewpoints. And then I said, are you addressing me? Question mark. I'm John M., host of the podcast. Because she really didn't say, she didn't address anybody. She was just kind of, saying her viewpoint. And I didn't even know if I'm assuming she listened to the podcast. I don't know. But anyway, I says, tell me about yourself. What has helped you keep sober? And I'm assuming it's something, she's tried a method that's utilized the BITE method or whatever it's called. And it says, I realize there are different ways to get and maintain sober living. And then I said, and I'm curious, I'm curious as to what prompted you to listen to the podcast. You just kind of wonder, why are they listening to the podcast or even going to the site or whatever if this is not their cup of tea? And then I said, P.S. Would you like me to add your email to the list? I definitely don't want to receive something I don't want you receiving something you're not interested in. So, the reason, so I just wanted you to see the exchange, and I've given it a couple of weeks for Susan. I'm assuming that's a real name. It could be a guy, could be a gal, could be a cinnamon. I don't know. But I given it a couple of weeks before I read this because I was hoping that she would reply to me again. But Susan, if you're out there and you're listening, feel free to reply to my email. I'd like to know a little bit more about you. Everyone's got their different view, and that's okay. All right. Okay. So here is an email. I am going to leave out the name, okay? Because let me just read it. She says, hello there, my name is so-and-so. I'm shaking even writing this. I know I need to reach out to someone or I may never again. I have been a closet drinker the past 3 years, which has been scaring myself. Then she talked about the episode from Andy V. If you haven't heard those 2 episodes, go back. They're really worth it. She says, the Andy V message really moved me. She is telling my story. It's a profession who is loved in my community. People would never know that I close my doors in sulk and pain. I used to teach exercise, fitness connection. I used to be so healthy and now I don't know who I am. I live in such and such, and I'm looking for support. Is there any way I could have a strong woman to help me? Desperate. I need to change, and I'll leave out the name. And so I got that lady in touch with Andy, and Andy has been working with her. I don't know really where it's gone, but I'm so glad you wrote in, and I think you're going to be an inspiration for others with me reading this. If you are out there and you need to reach out to someone and you're a closet drinker, or even if you're not a closet drinker, a lot of times I just act as a matchmaker, right? Let me know if there's one of the speakers you want to talk to, or excuse me, the speakers, the / guest, and I'll do my best to get you in touch with them. If I can't get you in touch with them, we can get you in touch with somebody else. But God bless you. I'm so glad that you wrote in, and I'm so glad that you and Andy were able to communicate. Jennifer writes in, and the subject line is thanks to, once again, Andy V. And by the way, if you're looking for that and you don't know who Andy V is, it's ANDI. It's a female Andy. And she says, my first time ever listening to the podcast, and Andy's story gave me so much hope. I'm closing in on 9 months of sobriety and hitting a rough patch. Boy, do I understand that, Jennifer. She said, I needed something this morning, and I couldn't make a meeting until tonight. Andy's story lifted my spirits, and her wisdom and shed some light on my path. God is good. Big clapping hands and big heart. And thank you. And Jen K. Thanks, Jen K. I appreciate you writing in. I'm glad that Andy was able to uplift your spirits. David writes in, and he says, Dear John, I am a Brit naturalized in Australia, living in Sydney, and I visit the USA often, and I've been sober since January of 1989. I met Alan B. on an LAX to Sydney flight a few years ago, and we became friends. Yeah, for those, he knows it, but Alan B. has been on the podcast several times before. And anyway, David says, I'm a 5th generation pearl dealer, and I love travel and AA, and Alan sent me your podcast, so I was happy to listen in for the first time to your interview with him, which was pretty heart-wrenching, having met his family at home in California a few years ago. If you've not heard the latest episode with Alan B., whew, man, that is one of the most heart-wrenching stories we have ever had. Anyway, David says, wishing you all blessings from the land down under. All the best, David. What's that song? From the land down under, where women and men thunder, or whatever it is. But you know what I'm talking about. There's that one Australian song that talks about the land down under. David, I'm so glad you wrote in, my friend, and I'm so glad to have met you. Hopefully we get to meet eyeball to eyeball here one of these days in the future. But thank you for writing in. Corliss writes in, and Corliss says, hey, John M., I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much for your podcast and your service to our beautiful fellowship. It is a beautiful fellowship, Corliss. And they say, I was let go from my previous job about 5 months ago after 9 years and got my next assignment only 1 month after. Well, good for you. Man, I understand those job struggles. I really do. Anyway, Corliss says, it was a bit further drive, for the next assignment than what I had been used to. So I decided to start listening to podcasts. I gathered some information from my AA friends on how to proceed, and I found yours right off the bat. And I'm so very grateful that I did. It's been just amazing. I can totally relate to you. And when you sometimes go off the rails or say a word and get and get sidetracked and just find myself laughing out loud with you. Well, good, Corliss. Hopefully this is one of those times. And Corliss, I think Corliss is, I'm so sorry. I think Corliss is a man, and he says, my sobriety date is, much like on the Family Feud. I'm going to start doing that, I think, every time. My sobriety date is 3/25 of 2011. And for that, I am so very grateful. I was facing 10 to 99 3 times, and God gave me a miracle. I ended up having a big trial. The judge changed his mind at the last second, amongst other variables. All God orchestrated, and he blessed me with 2 years treatment facility, which was the Senecor Foundation in Fort Worth, and 10 years probation, which I completed in August of 2021. Thank you, Father. And then he says, at Senecor, they required us just to attend meetings about a year into it. And I was so very grateful because I knew that AA was going to be a part of my life. I have been going ever since. I have a sponsor, and I have the privilege of being a sponsor. I am a member of the Glass House Group in Fort Worth, Texas, and I reside in the Richland Hills area. Yeah, so the Glass House Group, I believe, if I remember right, that's where, oh gosh, what's his name? He was like Clancy, not Clancy's sponsor, but I think he was Evie's sponsor for a while, if I'm not mistaken, but I can't remember his name right now. I'm so sorry. But anyway, he says, I'm grateful for this daily reprieve today and that I get to. Thank you, John, for this podcast and your service. And if you are ever in the Fort Worth area, please come on by and visit us. Much love and much gratitude, one day at a time. Corliss B. And let me say this, if you are ever in the Frisco area, you want to come visit us, please let me know. I'll do my best to meet you there. But thank you, Corliss. And if I'm ever out there in Fort Worth at the Glass House Group, I'll give you a shout out. And finally, last but not least, Kevin DMs on the Instagram. He says, hi, John, from Not So Sunny Scotland. Thank you for your service. I really enjoy the podcast. It helps me keep sober and learn from the speakers. I'm 5 months sober, and after a period of homelessness prior to sobriety, I am on the right track now. I'm doing service, attending meetings, and working with a great sponsor who has taken me through the program. Best wishes, Kevin M. in Dundee, Scotland. Well, hello. Wait a sec. I went from like Scotland to a more of a, I think, an Australian accent. But nonetheless, thanks for writing, Kevin M. As I've said before, and I told you, my mom was from Glasgow, and I hope to get back over there someday. I think I was saying that a little earlier with somebody who's from Ireland. Plenty listener feedback. All right, everybody, that there is another episode of Sober Speak. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate ya. May God bless you and keep you until then, and keep coming back. It works if you work it, and take this 1 week at a time. I hope to be back next week. Love you guys. Bye-bye.